I call this fly the double stinger dinger, and in this video I'm going to show you how to tie it, how to fish it. I've got some footage at the end showing some of the fish that I've caught with it, as well as like the techniques that I used. But the main thing I want to point out up front is that this fly is heavily based on another pattern called the Jeffrey Dauber, which is an imitation of a dirt dauber fly tied by a guy named Charlie Craven, who has a great tutorial on a YouTube channel called In the Riffle. You should definitely go check it out. So we're going to start off with 2 size 8 Aberdeen hooks. These are just cheap Walmart hooks. You can use size 8 dry fly hooks if you like. I just happen to use Aberdeen hooks. Saves you a lot of money. The fish don't care. And you're going to tie on with whatever thread you like. I like to use a dark brown or a black. If you don't have those colors, a nice little hack is that you can color them black with a marker. Then you're going to take some monofilament line. I'm using 8-pound test. If it's a little bit more or a little bit less, I don't think it's a huge deal. Once you've got that tied in, you're going to cut off a very skinny strip of foam. And you can experiment with the width of this. I decided to make it, I don't know, maybe half the width of a pencil or a little bit less than the width of a pencil. The reason being is because when you're wrapping it on this tiny little hook, you want to just make sure that it's not so thick that it fills in the gap between the hook point and the hook shank so that it'll actually fit in the mouth of the fish that you're trying to target. I'm coloring one side of it black so that when I tie it in and wrap it around the shank of the hook, it'll have this like spiral. The reason for that is just to simplify having to color the foam after the fact. I found that it's a lot easier to just tie one side of it and wrap it in. Make sure that when you're doing this, you're putting some glue down, because if you don't, it's really easy for it to come unwrapped, and it's just going to make it more durable for the long run when you use this fly. I don't know, you could probably use this fly at least 100 times, like 50 to 100 fish, before it just kind of starts to fall apart like some flies will. It's pretty tough once you put all the glue in there. The brilliance of this pattern, and I'm giving all the credit for this idea to Charlie Craven, is the fact that it has this little separated abdomen that's attached with that monofilament line. Because if you look at the way that a wasp looks, it has that little segment connecting the abdomen stinger to the like main body of the insect. And I just feel like there's no better way to imitate it than that. It is so cool. And I was just so excited when I saw that for the first time. It like floored me. I was like, oh, that is amazing. And so I immediately started goofing around with that pattern to see if I could make it in different ways. Once you've got that tied into the second hook, then what you're going to do is get another piece of foam. I'm tying a little triangle onto it just to make it easier to tie into the shank because of how wide it is. It's about twice the width of the strip of foam that we used for the abdomen. And again, experiment with it. Don't just like take all my advice and follow it to a T. Make it your own. Come up with different sizes if you want to. I really think it's way better than just like having an exact copy of all the tutorials you watch online. Regardless, I'm tying in the black ahead of time just because I found that it's harder to do so once you've already tied in the foam. So I think it's better to have that black up top, especially because if you're trying to be a stickler, then if you look at those insects, they've got black underneath the bottom of their bodies. I'm tying in 2 Sili legs, and what I've done is, if you look at the patterns, they faded on these Sili legs because I've owned them for so long, or maybe they sat in the sun for a little bit. So I just went ahead and made some black markings to make them look like the centipede legs, which is what most of the Sili legs with those markings look like, so that it's a white-black color. I don't think that it's particularly important that they have that pattern. It's just a personal preference. Any Sili leg will probably do as long as you're matching like the color profile. Once you've got those tied in, this is some Krystal flash in the color tan and then some polywing material. And what I do is I tie in the polywing material first. I'm going to strip it a little bit so that it's separated, because if you don't do that, it'll stay way too close together. Tie that in loosely on the first 2 wraps and then tighter on the second, third, fourth, fifth wrap. And then I'm going to take those 2 strands of Krystal flash and cut them once in half and cut them again in half, making them into quarters. I'm going to tie the first 2/4 or the first half of them in. And I'm trying to put it on either side so that it's like evenly distributed. And then I'm going to tie in that second half of the material on top of that. And then once you've done that, it really helps put some glue in there so that if you are throwing this fly around really aggressively the way that I do, it won't come out. Then after that, you're going to measure out, try and figure out the size of the 3D eyes you're going to use before you tie it in, and then go ahead and make that segment to make the head of the fly. This video is getting away from me. It's going so fast. Once you've got that head shape in there, you're going to gently tie in those legs. I'm not putting very tight wraps on them because you don't want to split the rubber. You also don't want to lose and break off on your thread. Then I'm going to tie a whip finish, which is just a knot, fancy knot for fly tires. And then I put in a lot of glue on my flies because I want them to be as indestructible as possible. So I went ahead and added almost an absurd amount of glue to that shank to make sure that the foam isn't going to rotate around. Next, I'm going to put in these 3D eyes, which are 3mm 3D eyes. I get them off of Amazon. I get like 1,000 of them for $19. It's the best deal ever. Do not buy eyes from any fly shop. Unless you are like super loving of your local fly shop, which I am too, but I'm still not willing to pay their prices for their fly eyes. I'm going to cure it on there with some UV resin and a UV light. And then once you've done all that, you're pretty much done. You can go in and mark up the fly with a black marker, because a real one of these flies, like if you're hardcore, is going to have a bunch of black markings on the top of the fly. But to me, not as important. Stay tuned and I will show you some of the fish that I've caught with this awesome little fly. Here I'm in the hill country and I'm fishing under a little bridge. This is probably the coolest footage I've gotten, where I'd thrown all the way up into that bridge
there
and didn't catch anything for several casts until this guy kind of almost lazily hooked into it right in front of me. It was just in the sun. It was a really, really hot day. So fishing the shadows, which is usually what I'm going to do, especially on the quad, is always a good play for this particular fly. Super skinny bass, but
he's really skinny.
I'll take it. Love getting that shot of it hitting it in slow motion. Then here I am in Austin, Texas. This is Lady Bird Lake right below Barton Springs, and you kind of have to watch out for the permanent campers that are hanging out, but usually they cheer you on. Sometimes they yell at you and throw stuff, but for the most part they're cheering you on and having a good time watching you catch fish. I caught a nice fat sunfish followed by another skinny one. The way that I was catching this, it had been hot during that day. It cooled off, so I was throwing the fly out, letting it hit the water pretty hard, letting it sit, especially right here in the more still waters where the current isn't as fast. And I was just 1,000, 2,000. If it didn't get hit, I'd start doing tiny little strips, and I had a lot of success with that. I'd caught, I don't know, like 15, 20 fish in 20 or 30 minutes that day, but those are the two clips that I chose to use for this video. The last clip that I'm going to be using is when I was in Longview, Texas, on a private lake that is actually the water source for a golf course out there in East Texas. And I was using my Tenkara rod, one of my favorite rods to use. I caught a lot of rock bass that day, super interesting species, and what a fun fly to use, awesome pattern. I can't thank Charlie Craven enough for this excellent idea of having that abdomen and for tying a pattern that so accurately represents a dirt dauber and a wasp. And I think it's a really cool fly that a lot of people are shocked to see in your fly box, because not very many people think of hornets or wasps as something that fish will target, but they absolutely are. If you got anything out of this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you could give me some feedback in the comments, and if you like, go ahead and subscribe.